Welcome. This is the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee. We're meeting today on a couple of items. The first being raising the age programming, which would also be including discussions of housing. And we'll also be looking with the Department of Children and Family Services to get an update on the Beckett proposal, which, if you remember, folks, we talked about this last fall in terms of contracting with Beckett to provide services for our juveniles who are involved in the justice system. And we need an update on where they are. We were hoping a facility would be up and running to take some of our juveniles by this time, but there's been some issues that need to be resolved. So we're going to receive an update on that. And more conversations on juveniles that may be sent out of state. And then we'll end the afternoon with talking about expungement, because we do have a committee charge for expungement, and talking broad scopes on that. Our lawyer, Michelle Childs, is unable to be with us today, so the portions of the agenda where she is indicated to testify, we will bump that to our next meeting. Okay. So let's start with the first item on our agenda, which is raising the age programming, which also includes housing. And I will turn this over to Erica,
you're right.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. For the record, my name is Erica Radke, and I'm Deputy Commissioner for the Family Services Division of DCF. I've been asked to talk about report basically on programming and housing for Act 201, also known as Raise the Age. Over the past year, there were approximately 504 delinquent youths in DCF custody. Of those, roughly 180 were at least 18 years old at the time their charges were filed. So DCF has been tasked with implementing the first legislation in the country to carve out juvenile jurisdiction for emerging adults. The principles and intent behind Raise the Age are to improve outcomes for youth, to increase public safety, and to reduce costs, given the high rates of recidivism in this population when they're confined in the adult criminal system. So we've just concluded our first year of implementation of Act 201, and there have been some challenges due to the pandemic, particularly for a small subset or population of the youth in our custody. One concern is really providing placements and programming for these emerging adults in order to address issues related to their housing. So we've had to be creative. DCF has partnered with DOC to secure 7 beds in a program they've been working with for some time. Now, 2 of these beds can be used for an emergency placement. And the program provides a staffed, supervised setting and is located in central Vermont. We've already had 1 individual with a youthful offender status residing in the program, and we've been really satisfied with the work the program has done thus far. We're also in the process of negotiating with the program in the southern part of the state to secure 4 beds in a more independent transitional style living setting. And DCF will also be looking for a provider to stand up a similar program in the northwest part of the state. So what we're doing is really trying to devise a layered array of programming and placements, from emergent to staffed and supervised to transitional style living, in order to more appropriately and comprehensively address the needs of this cohort. But workforce shortages have proved to be problematic in this endeavor. The lack of staffing in community-based services and in residential placement facilities has really impacted the supports available across our system of care as a whole, including the emerging adult population. Another concern is as Raise the Age has moved forward, is the prospect of being responsible for those emerging adults exhibiting a level of dangerousness that, while not necessarily listed as a Big 12 offense, but is still very disturbing from a public safety perspective. And as DCF continues to serve this population, we also recognize the need to balance that with the public's need for safety. How youthful offender interacts with Raise the Age has also emerged as another challenging area. We've been carefully analyzing the matter and hopefully we'll be able to be in position soon to share more details about what we've been looking at. In closing, I'd just like to say that despite the issues we've encountered this year, our division really remains focused on the principles and intent behind Raise the Age. And we're really working hard to serve the needs of emerging adults that come into our care. So thank you for your time. And does the committee have any questions?
I do.
So I have just a couple questions. So for the ones right now that have been placed, you have 7 beds in central Vermont?
Yes.
So this was done in coordination with DCF and DOC, correct?
That's correct.
And who has custody of the juveniles? Is it DCF custody, is it DOC custody, or is it joint?
This particular youth is joint DOC and DCF. He was a youthful offender. He was on the youthful offender status.
So you only have one placement at this point?
That's right.
What is the age of the juvenile at this point? Is the person still 18 or they reached 19?
It's funny that you mentioned that. He will be aging out. I believe his 21st birthday is today.
Question, Senator Sears. Yeah, I just want a couple of comments and then I have some questions, but Michelle's not here today, but I wanted to make clear that there's 2 different bills or initiatives going on here. One is youthful offender. Youthful offender has been around for over 25 years. We've had statutes. We've continued to improve those, but I think there's some confusion between Raise the Age and youthful offender status. And our 1045 agenda item was youthful offender status definitions. And so I think we use that term and confuse that with Raise the Age. Raise the Age is raising, and they've known for two or 3 years that this was going to happen. And I'm disturbed by the preparation that's not been done for Raise the Age and then blame the Raise the Age. So we started with raising the age to 18. Those under 19 can be treated in family court if they are not charged with a Big 12. And then for next year, July 1st of 2021 would be up to 19. And I just want to make that clear to people that this, I'm just reading the governor's veto message again on S107, which also has created a lot of confusion because when the governor vetoed S107, he kind of blamed Raise the Age and the gaps in our systems. And frankly, I think it's the lack of preparation. Now, I don't know what you're talking about for independent living for serious juvenile offenders. It's not clear to me. Are we doing the same thing, moving away? And I want to get some clarification about what that means, that 4 in the South and 4 in the North, independent living.
Sure, it's independent style living where there will still have some case planning supports and counseling services available. However, the real intent is not for those offenders with the more serious crimes. These are for individuals where they, they'll be taking responsibility for the crime that they committed, yet they're still at a level where they need to move into adulthood, and we'll be giving them supports and services along that line.
But what are we doing for those 18-year-olds who have committed or who are dangerous or committed serious crimes? What is the plan for that group?
We are still internally discussing how we want to address that, and if there are any legislative fixes that we would be contemplating. And at this point, we're still coming up with a plan to discuss with our commissioner so that he'll have all of the knowledge and information that we have so that he can make his decisions and then discuss it with the secretary. So that is a question that has been discussed. It's just that I'm not able to really go into detail at this time.
Well, if I might read from the governor's veto message of S-107, he said, 3 years ago, I signed legislation intended to give young adults who had become involved in the criminal justice certain protections meant for juveniles. At that time, I was assured that prior to the automatic increases in age prescribed in the bill, plans would be in place to provide access to rehabilitation, services, housing, and other supports needed to both hold the young adults accountable and help them stay out of the criminal justice system in the future. With all due respect to the administration, what we're hearing today is that that has not yet happened. That is deeply disturbing to
Well,
me.
Senator Sears, I guess I would say that definitely the 7 beds we have in conjunction with the DOC would accommodate a certain population. But if we're speaking of individuals of a level of dangerousness where there's an issue in terms of public safety, our position is not necessarily that DCF is really the area where they should be accommodated.
With all due respect, I'm merely pointing out that we've had 3 years to put this plan in place. And it's deeply disturbing to me that it wasn't done. And now we're, faced as of July 1, we're faced with this new law. And my fear is that we end up throwing out raise the age because of the lack of preparation. That's what I'm concerned with, and I appreciate that the administration is doing what they can now. And I know we had a pandemic, and I know that interrupted everything. But I just want to make clear in this public setting that I still believe that raise the age is the right thing to do for Vermont, but we need the services available to deal and hold these kids accountable, as well as protecting the public where that's necessary.
I agree with you, Senator. And actually, and that's why I ended my remarks emphasizing that FSD really is still committed to the intent and the meaning behind raise the age. But I understand.
It's also, I do want to once again point out there is confusion about the difference between raise the age and youthful offender status. Hopefully we can clear that up at our next meeting and put that agenda item on.
Yes, that would be helpful because I always get them confused with that. Senator Hooker, Cheryl?
Thank you, Alice. Erica, can you tell me what the setting is for the 7 beds that you have in Central Vermont?
Yes, it's a structured setting where there's apps, there's counseling, case management. The individuals are able to go out and work, and it's very supportive in terms of helping them move to the next step in their lives.
Okay, but this is a congregate setting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So Erica, I was intrigued by one of your responses to Senator Sears that for some of the youth, 18-year-olds and possibly 19-year-olds. Are we at 19-year-old right now with raise the age, or we're still at 18?
We're still at 18.
And we're to go up to 19 next July, 22?
That's what the law is set up for at this point.
So I was intrigued by a response that was given that DCF feels that what they're seeing, that some of the 18-year-olds, because either their behavior, not necessarily maybe the crime that they're charged with, but maybe their behavior, that it shouldn't be DCF that should have the responsibility. Who should? Are you thinking it should be DOC?
You know, that's a discussion that we would have with them, but I do think that it's, instead of looking so much at the crime, but focusing more on the behavior and the issue in terms of public safety, it is possible that certain youths may be more appropriately served in a DOC setting. But our intent with Raise the Age, though, is to carve out as many youths as possible to maintain that juvenile jurisdiction so that they can have treatment through the family court, so they're not necessarily in the adult criminal system. But in the event there are certain individuals that have a level of dangerousness that our social workers and aren't simply weren't trained or equipped to handle.
So they're charged with a crime that keeps them in the family court, but the issue is more their behavior that puts at risk the public safety and possibly the juvenile's own safety. How much of that is driven by mental health issues and not the criminal behavior?
Mm-hmm. You know, that's something we would have to look into. I don't want to just give a off the cuff answer. It's unclear at this point.
And how much of that might be driven by misuse of substances, not criminal thinking or behavior?
Those are absolute possibilities.
I'm just a little concerned that I guess that there's always been a tendency, not just in the Agency of Human Services world, but I think also in the legislative world and in the public, that if a department can't take care of someone, then it's up to DOC to take care of them. And we keep putting more and more pressure onto DOC when they're not equipped to deal with some of these issues either. And I guess that's my concern when I've heard that, well, some of the folks shouldn't be, DCF can't deal with some of these public safety issues or behavior issues. The question is, what entity is the most appropriate entity to deal with it, and not to say, well, it's DOC's responsibility. That's my concern.
May I step in here, Representative Emmons?
If you could just identify yourself for the record too.
Yes, my name is Jennifer Micah, General Counsel for DCF. I think I take your point around issues around substance abuse and also issues of trauma. And I think that those are things that DCF is positioned to assist young people with. I think where we're struggling is particularly with some crimes where there is a gun offense associated with it, or there is an associated network with the child or the young person that affects our ability to keep the public safe. And so we don't have an opinion at this point around how best or which department is best to serve in each individual case. But I do think that we don't have the kinds of things that DOC has to contain an 18 and 19-year-old when they are have easy access to guns or to a network that allows them to leave. So I
Can you
think
be a
that,
little bit more, could you be a little bit more specific in what DOC has to deal with that versus DCF or DMH?
well, they have security for one thing, right? They have ankle bracelets. They have things like that we don't have, and which I would question whether is an appropriate thing for DCF to be using when we're trying to help young people.
Is it just the ankle bracelet and those monitorings, or is it because there's a facility that they could go to if there's a violation of conditions? Like a correctional facility?
I don't think there's anybody in DCF. Granted, I haven't met everybody in DCF, but of the people that I've spoken with in DCF, nobody wants to see young people inappropriately locked up in a facility. So I don't think that's what I'm talking about. We are talking about a higher risk behaviors in young people. That is part of a trend that is not just in Vermont, it's all over. And the opioid epidemic and other drugs have certainly played into the challenges that our society is facing right now.
And that's where my rub comes in terms, we look to DOC to take care of those social issues. They may not be always the appropriate department. Dick?
Right. Yeah, I just, once again, we're back to where we started. One of the gun issues that you're talking about is a shoot up at a mall, and that person was charged as youthful offender, had nothing to do with raise the age. And that was the state's attorney's decision in Chittenden County. This had nothing to do with raise the age. And I think we're conflating that. Secondly, when the governor provided his veto message, he said, in addition to ongoing housing challenges, programs designed and implemented for children under 18 are often not appropriate for those over 18. That's what we were agreeing on. But he also said that he was concerned that some kids were being used by drug traffickers and others, and the guns were involved. This is part of the veto message. Disturbingly, there are reports of some young adults being used and actively recruited by older criminals, like drug traffickers, to commit crimes because of reduced risk of incarceration, potentially putting young people we are trying to protect deeper into the criminal culture and greater risk. That's what I'm hearing you say. All right, when I asked Commissioner Brown at an earlier meeting about the age of these young people, he said, I believe there were 3 to 6, somewhere in that number, and all were under the age of 18. So I'm just, I feel like obviously this would terrify many in the public to start talking about what you just talked about, Jennifer. So I'm just concerned about the level of discourse here. Are these kids under 18? And if so, they're already in the juvenile system.
So in answer to your question is, I don't have the statistics, and I think maybe it would be worthwhile for you to ask perhaps
Commissioner Brown assured us at I believe it was the last meeting, and maybe the one before that these kids were all under 18, that the governor was talking about in his veto message. Today, you're saying the same thing as what's in the veto message. And I'm curious as to, other than that one gun incident at the mall in Chittenden County, where the prosecutor decided to charge as a youthful offender, which is raise the age.
I think I would say to the point, Senator Sears, that some of our staff are very concerned about the one person who is going to come into our custody, who's going to be very, very difficult to work with. And so I think that what the governor is talking about is not vast numbers of people, but the particular severity of some of the behaviors associated with a very small number of people. And I'm not here today to say that raise the age should be scrapped in its entirety. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say that I think that there are issues that we need to address around public safety in our implementation of that program.
I appreciate that, but I'm trying to determine whether these kids are 17, 16, 14, or 18. And it's not clear to me what age group they are. They're already, if they're under 16, they were always part, and you've always had dangerous kids in DCF custody. Frankly, that's nothing new. I dealt with them for 40 years. And that's clear, all right? I'm just trying to determine whether what we're talking about has to do with dangerous kids who've come into DCF custody, whether they're 15 or 18. What are we doing to prepare for secure settings for them? That's what I believe the question was. And I was understanding that when we designed Beckett, that we were supposed to be able to have a secure facility like Woodside for those kids. And I think part of the problem that we're not the next agenda item, part of the problem is that Beckett isn't in place yet, and we don't have a Woodside to hold these kids. And I don't blame staff for being concerned. And I know down in Bennington, we've got some of those kids at the CL programs and at the Vermont, it always escapes me the name of the Vermont Girls Program in Bennington.
The School for Girls? The Vermont
School for Girls, thank you, Deputy Commissioner.
Right, and Beckett will only.
I think we're confusing. Yeah, I think we're confusing some of these issues, remembering that we did close Woodside, and that we don't have a staff, a secure facility right now, whether they're 15 or 17 or 18.
Right, and Beckett, just to be clear, Beckett will only serve up to age 17. So when a child reaches their 18th birthday, a young person reaches their 18th birthday, they can no longer be at Beckett. So I think that from a public safety perspective, if you talk to the Commissioner of Public Safety, for instance, I think what he'll tell you is that he's concerned about continuing to raise the age and what happens.
With all due respect, Council, and to the administration, once again, you had 3 years, and I don't know why the contract with Beckett was minimized to that age group, under 17, when you knew that this was going to happen.
I think that'll be addressed in a later testimony around how we determine the age and the community and that sort of thing. There are always compromises.
Understood, but then that doesn't mean that you still don't need a secure facility for that group. Maybe Department of Corrections needs to run it, I don't know. But it still needed a secure facility for some kids who are over 18 or over 17.
I just want to emphasize, Senator Sears, that really when we're talking about children of a certain level of dangerousness, that's really just a small cohort. So we are anticipating that the vast majority of the raise the age youth will be able to be have placements within the structures that we're building. And as I said earlier, there are other ongoing discussions.
Good. Well, I appreciate that. And I don't mean to be belaboring the point, but it's disturbing to hear some of the conversation. We knew there were going to be kids who were dangerous. Criminal behavior doesn't always tell us exactly what the level of dangerousness it is. Somebody that steals a candy bar can be just as serious as someone who actually commits very serious crimes.
We're losing audio.
Yeah, we're losing your audio, Senator.
Well, that's probably a good thing.
I miss you sitting here at the table.
Well, I'll be quiet for now. I think I've said it.
That's fine. Thank
I do
you.
have a question.
Teresa and then Butch.
Erica, I just wanted to, could you say again, at the outset, you said you had over 504 and then 188, I think is the number that you said. Is 188, are those, I was unclear, those 18-year-olds?
Yes, let me pull up my notes to make sure I get it just right. There are about there are 180 that are at least 18 years old at the time their charges were filed. But because of the way our computer system, is pretty antiquated, it's really hard to get the data just right. So we were comparing court data to our own internal data. So we believe that there are about 180 that are over 18 at this time. And of those, and Tyler, please step in here, but I do believe of the over 18 that would be raise the age type youth, I believe they're all being held within the community at this point. They have community-based placements. Tyler?
Thank you. For the record, my name is Tyler Allen. I'm the Adolescent Services Director for the Family Services Division of the Department of Children and Families. So those data are a little bit challenging to work with, and those numbers came out of court data. And so it was the best swing we could take at the time, but over the course of a year, there were 504 youths that were processed through the court system. Of those 500, 180 of them were at the age of 18 at the time of the court filing, which doesn't necessarily mean that they were 18 at the time of the offense. Just for clarification, so the number might be smaller than, or is certainly smaller than 180, but it's just trying to get an understanding of what that population is. And I can also clarify, a lot of those cases would have gone to diversion, and Deputy Commissioner is absolutely right. Virtually all of those young people were able to be served in the community, and that's where the vast majority of our resources and expertise to date is in working within the foster care systems or within communities with youth in their homes in the community. So I hope that provides necessary clarification.
Yes, that's helpful. And so the cohort that Senator Sears and Ms. Micah were just speaking of is a subset of those in a relatively small number is what I'm gathering.
That is absolutely correct, and I would also say that is a potential vulnerability. So they're not all descriptive cohort. This is there's the potential that there is an individual who falls into that category, but this would be a very small percentage of those we serve.
So I guess, and not to confuse matters here, but I understand DCF's. It seems like there's growing anxiety around this small group of people and their ability to serve them. We place that same kind of responsibility on other private nonprofit entities in our system, namely the designated agencies. When somebody goes into their custody who has been adjudicated not to be able to stand trial, but it's that offense. And so I guess with all due respect to the administration, we ask other people to do the same thing that we're asking them to do.
Butch?
Thank you. So, Erica, I think I heard early on that you, when Senator Sears brought up the time frame of like 2 or 3 years, that this has been looming along, and then he read from the governor's veto message about lack of services. And I think I heard you say, well, we're in discussions. We're continually in discussions. Why are we continually in discussions? Are you short of resources? What's the issue? What's the roadblock so you can't move forward and settle the issue between the governor's request and the legislature's request?
That's a good question. We are finding it difficult because of the workforce challenges to find placements that have the services that we need. That is one issue. And the other issue really is our grappling with that small subset of the cohort that we're still discussing and trying to figure out how they should be best managed.
So when you say workforce challenges, and you mentioned, I think I heard you say workforce challenges within the providers, or is it within your agency?
Primarily providers. We do have some workforce challenges within FSD, but we're talking more about placements and being able to have the different agencies don't have the staff available to have enough beds. That's an issue we've been having across our system of care.
When do you think that you may be able to have some sort of an answer to for the legislature from the governor's veto message?
We are talking, and we are definitely shooting to have something to the secretary in preparation for the legislative session.
Thank you.
Any other questions here? I'm sure we're going to be revisiting this and revisiting it, revisiting it. Any other questions, folks? Okay, Deputy Commissioner, thank you. I'm sure, as I said, there will be more discussions of this within the legislative arena, maybe this committee between now and January, but definitely when the session begins in January.
Thank you
I
very much.
want to thank all three of you.
Thank you, Representative Emmett.
Thank you,
Okay, we hope we
Representative. I
can-
appreciate your time today.
Person. Okay, let's shift to, we're still talking about the youth. We have with us Commissioner Brown from DCF, who we wanted to have an update of the Beckett facility, where we are in negotiations at this point, what is also happening within the community. We have some folks who are joined us electronically. And I also know we have BGS here with us too. BGS does have a little bit of a role in this in terms of making sure that there is a performance contract with the contractor who will eventually be doing work. If we go forward with the building, we need to do renovations in that building. And also BGS will also be working with DOC in the construction documents, renovations that may be proposed for this facility. That was legislation that was put in the budget adjustment bill on the appropriations side. There was money that was in the appropriations budget adjustment, and I'm really gonna stretch my memory here, but I believe it was $2 million in the FY 21 budget adjustment. And that was within DCF's budget for the renovation. And that was also in addition to previous money, was it 1.2? 2.2 million in the previous budget. Yeah, for a total of about approximately 4.4 million. 3.2.
Yep.
Approximately 3.2 million for renovations at a facility that is owned by Beckett. So there was also concern that BGS would also be involved in this, as DCF is not working in the construction and negotiating with building contractors and architects. So also in the interim, while that was part of the picture here, the first part of the picture was for DCF to really negotiate with Beckett and also hold some public meetings in the town of Newberry. And we would like to have an update in terms of where we are with the Beckett proposal at this point. I know that you do have a handout or a PowerPoint. I'm not sure if you have this. So I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner Brown.
Yes, and with me today, we do have the team from BGS that we've been working very closely with on the project. Also, we have the architectural firm, Studio Nexus, Jim and Doug from that group with us as well. And also our clinical director, Jennifer Herbert, working on the design of the program with the Beckett team as well. And the project does continue to move forward to build this 6-bed secure treatment facility in Newberry. It was originally given the name of the Covered Bridges, and then we realized there's a similar program in that general Northeast Kingdom area that's a substance abuse treatment program. And so we've now changed the name to the Wells River Treatment, just to avoid confusion with the other program that's in that area. The department is working closely with Beckett as we move this project forward. Also, it's the city area, the Vermont Permanency Initiative. They run several programs in Southern Vermont. BGS has been very intimately involved as well. Also, National Consultants, the Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators, several consultants there to make sure we're using evidence-based best practices as we design, the overall treatment milieu and the programming available, and then also working closely with Studio Nexus as well. We are, in terms of the programming piece, in terms of the behavioral health, we're really looking to make sure we're implementing trauma-informed and culturally sensitive practices that are evidence-based and use, mental health assessment and treatment opportunities that focus on restorative justice and permanency planning as quickly as we can once youth arrive at the facility. Those assessments, diagnostics will allow that treatment to begin early and then transition. Someone steps down to a less restrictive center of care. We really want stays at the facility for these youth to be as brief as possible. We believe the best environment for treatment and progress to be made is in the community. And so our goal is for stays in this program to be as brief as possible to stabilize, put them on a course of treatment, transition that treatment to the community, whether it's in a less restrictive residential setting, in-state or out of state, or both back with their in their home or with a foster parent. So those are our goals as we look to implement our behavioral health program at this center. We continue to work with Beckett, and Jennifer is very involved in that work right now. Just to remind the committee, this population to be served in this center is going to be justice-involved youth. No children in need of care supervision, which is the other side of the house. We have the juvenile justice side that we work with, but then also, the bulk of the children we serve are on the chin side, but this will focus on the juvenile justice, and will serve boys aged to 12 and 17, and it will be a no reject eject facility, similar to the way Woodside was as well. One of the issues, we did do a series of community outreach, as indicated, Representative Emmons. We did a series of 3 public forums in conjunction with the select board in Newberry, but March, they were several hours each over 3 nights. Some of the issues that came up were regarding safety, and others were impact on the community. One of those issues highlighted was whether there would be an impact on the roads and traffic in their community. So as a part of our work and listening to the community, we worked with Studio Nexus to bring on an expert to do a traffic study. And so that was completed this spring. The project is not based on that study. It is not expected to increase traffic significantly in their community. Didn't recommend any road improvements, in conjunction with this project for the community. It did recommend, given that this facility is on a dead end road, at the end of that dead end road, about a half a mile up, that we have a maintenance plan in place when this facility opens to make sure that the site is accessible in all weather conditions. And that will be a part of our operating agreement with Beckett to make sure that that plan is in place and that they're able to maintain the road so that we'll be able to get, staff in and out and youth in and out when needed in all types of weather conditions. Another issue that popped up as we were working on this to spring to evaluate it and determine the course forward was that there was a wetlands issue identified for the site that dates back, I think, to when the site was originally in is what we believe, and Beckett believes. And so we needed to wait until the spring for an engineer to come in to do a site assessment and determine if there was a wetland on the property and what that buffer zone was like. Again, our partners at Studio Nexus brought in a private engineer to do that assessment. And as it turns out, there is a small wetland on the site on a wooded edge, and delineating the buffer zone. The parking lot that predates on that property is in that buffer zone. And so to remediate that, we worked with Studio Nexus to redesign the parking area and the outside rec area to make sure that we were outside of that buffer zone, and also develop a plan to restore that area that was covered by the parking lot. And once that happens, we would remediate the wetlands issue, and it would no longer be an area where we would need a wetlands permit, because we would be outside the buffer zone, and we would restore the area in that buffer zone right now where the parking lot is in one area, goes into that buffer zone.
I asked a question here. So where is the price tag of that remediation being picked up? Is that within the 3.2 million?
Yes, we would cover it within those funds that we have available. And now that we've been able to address the wetlands issue, because it could impact the design of the building and the program and the way that we were running it, we were able to this spring to finalize the plans for the facility, the parking lot, and the rec area. And so we have our engineers here on the ground floor of the facility that looks out into an open area in the backyard is where the the bedrooms for the youth will be located, and also some of the educational programming room. On the second, or would be the first floor that you walk into from the ground level in front of the building, would be like where there'll be an exercise room, a kitchen, a family room, and then the rest of the building will be utilized as office space and training space by the Beckett team running the programming. Unfortunately, and then we also provided some schematic pictures that the architects developed, just to give you a rendering of what it will look like if it's developed and built and renovated. That you'll see on the picture here. You will see these were renderings done by the architect. Jim and Doug, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add in terms of the design. I know now that we've finalized what it will be, the construction design documents that a contractor would use are now being developed by the architects now. That's the second piece. Yeah. Yes.
So in terms of these designs, it's basically what we do in the construction world is schematic design, which is just a really broad scope in terms of what it could be, but you're at the point of doing design documents that will then get you out to an RFP for construction? Is that where you are?
We have brought on already a general contractor for the project, and I would defer to BGS to kind of pick up the pieces here. They've been very involved in the design work and also working with the architects. I mean, this is their expertise, and relying on that expertise as we've been moving forward in terms of the final design, the site plan, and all of those details have really been to bring us guidance in that area.
So we were hoping, when we heard testimony last year, that about this time or in the fall, about the Beckett proposal, the plan or the thinking was that it would be up and running by now. So what has been the delay?
One, making sure we had robust community interaction. And so those getting those scheduled and happened into February to March. Responding to some of those issues raised at there, making sure we did a traffic study. And then also that one of the community members was also one who raised the wetlands issue, that there might be a wetlands issue. And so making sure we did our due diligence in moving this project forward. We wanted to make sure we addressed those issues, and the wetlands could not be identified until the spring, when you have to go out and assess the actual site and look at the vegetation growing and whether it's wetland vegetation to identify whether it's a wetlands issue. I'm not an expert in this area, but it took a little time to resolve those issues.
Teresa.
Commissioner, I see that permits and hearings that you have scheduled coming up in later in August and September. Do you, obviously you've done a review of the zoning, the zoning area, the zoning requirements for this physical location. I continue to receive correspondence from, and our Human Services Committee and other members, I'm sure, continue to receive correspondence from concerned residents of the community about this changing the flavor of the community and it being an agricultural community and things of the nature. So how, I know that, you know, zoning hearings are never certain, but what kind of, what is your estimation? I'm presuming that you didn't get this far into this project without feeling confident that you're within the zoning parameters that exist in the town.
That is correct. Beckett has hired a zoning attorney to prepare, you know, the permit application and to represent, you know, the state and Beckett in presenting before the DRB and the Act 250 Commission in that area for the permit. We did receive a correspondence yesterday from the Act 250 Commission, you know, notifying of the public hearing, narrowing of the 10 Act 250 criteria, and this is not my area of expertise. But
That was my concern.
Yes, yes. That the areas that the hearing will focus on the 25th for the Act 250 will be on two of the criteria. One would be traffic, and we've completed the traffic study, and the other would be noise. And so we will work to understand what the focus on that will be. But given that they narrowed it to those criteria, you know, the attorney believes it's an indication that we've satisfied the other criteria. These are the ones they want to focus on. But we'll see what happens at the hearing. I don't want to prejudge it by any stretch of the imagination. Also, we did a very detailed rule review of Newberry's zoning requirements and believe that this fit in under several different categories. And also the fact that this was already a permitted juvenile center or treatment facility in their town that had already gone through the process, you know, was an indication that we thought that this would work as well.
Mm-hmm. And so previously you had thought or had given testimony in Human Services that you thought, you know, perhaps in the spring that you would be ready to open. And does that timeline look achievable to you?
Spring of 22?
Yeah.
So our hope is that we move quickly through the permitting process. Once we receive the two permits, there's a 30-day appeal period. We do plan to move very quickly at the end of that time period to as soon as possible. Given much of the renovations is internal to the building, much of that work can go on through the winter. There'll be some site work that would need to wait till the spring, but once the ground's suitable for that work, but a lot of the internal work could happen. And the building's not been in use, so they'll have full access to the facility for the renovations as quickly as we can get in there once we have the permits.
So is that
that's why we're working on the construction.
so is that a yes, a maybe?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And you know, we heard the previous deputy commissioners speak to the challenges of staffing, particularly, you know, in community providers. And I'm just curious as to your level of confidence in Beckett's ability to be able to staff this home once it's ready to go.
We are very confident that they'll be able to staff it for a couple of reasons. One, they run several programs in that general area on the other side of the river, New Hampshire, and they've not had difficulty hiring staff there. I think their concern is that we might grab staff from their other programs because we're going to be paying a higher level of wage for the staff at this facility than they pay in their others and in programs in general. And so we believe with those factors that we should be able to hire the qualified staff that we need to run the facility.
And then just one final one. So I appreciate the approach of you're planning for discharge as soon as somebody comes in. I mean, I think that's the absolute right thing to be doing. And you're looking at short-term stays. Will we need any additional support in sort of that transition out in the services once somebody leaves this home? Will there need to be a beefing up of any of those kinds of supports, or do you feel like you have that sufficiently covered?
I would say the area where our concern is just in general right now, our providers and some of our current in-state and out-of-state residential programs are struggling to hire staff in the current labor market. And that is one of the, we'll have to see how that labor market looks next spring. And once we're operating and looking to discharge youth from this facility, I think it's a very dynamic environment we're in right now as a result of the pandemic. And so it's hard to predict what that will look like. But right now, we certainly are seeing the impact of many of our providers needing to limit the number of beds they have open just because of not being able to provide the full level of staffing to keep all the beds open. So that certainly creates a set of challenges. We hope that as we continue down this road of recovery, hopefully that those start to resolve and start seeing our programs come back full online.
Thank you.
So we have a couple of questions. We have Butch, Jenny Lyons, Senator Lyons, and Dick Sears, Senator Sears.
Morning, Commissioner. I got lost in a little bit in your testimony because I need a little refresher on when you started talking about wage rates, and then you said we will be paying more. Yes. So the employees state your employees, or are they Beckett?
They will be Beckett employees.
So the we was the partnership we.
Yes.
Will
yes.
Paying Beckett
yes.
more money.
Yes. Under the contract, that the level of hourly wage has been set at a higher rate than normal.
Okay. I just got a little confused with that. So thank you.
Jenny and then Dick. You gotta unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have a question, and that is, as you're talking about the some of the issues, the concerns, the timing, excuse me, what happens to folks once they're in, and then as they're released, the transitions and so on. What is the contract looking like? What does the MOU look like between the state and Beckett? Will we have an opportunity to review that so that we can understand the more discrete areas that we're trying to get at?
Yeah, so we're currently, working with Beckett on developing those agreements. One of those is the lease for the property, and then there will be a separate agreement on their operating the program and our oversight of that program, of their operation of that program. And so, we are more than happy to come back later as we have more details to share to kind of give you a broader overview of what those agreements are shaping up to look like as we get closer to finalizing those.
Well, but given the kind of the reality of architectural planning and developing the building for kids, for children who are either secure or in a semi-secure situation, it would be helpful to know what that contract looks like just for the building itself. And then what negotiations, it would be great to look at the contract for care and programming. It seems that they are very much related to one another. And I do think that there are some concerns that we may have, and also concerns that our the social service organizations might have as well. So I don't know how you do that, understanding, of course, that a lot of this becomes confidential and negotiations, but somehow to keep, I think, the chair of the committee or others up to date would be extremely helpful.
Happy to do that, Senator Lyons. Mark O'Grady, Deputy Commissioner for BGS, is with us today. He can give you a quick highlight of they're leading the lease negotiations, and we're working in conjunction with BGS, but they are the lead on those negotiations, and give you kind of a high level of where that process is at. I can step aside from Mark.
Why don't you come on up, Mark? Deputy Commissioner of BGS, like Mark O'Grady, just identify the record. And then we do have a question from Senator Sears too.
Good morning, Mark O'Grady, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Village and General Services. So we have been actively engaged, working together with the property owner to come up with an agreement that is fair and equitable to both sides. We have sent over our initial draft to them. They have then responded, and we are working on their edits, and then we'll send it back to them and hopefully get together in person to discuss the details of the proposed agreement. Really, I can't go into too many details because of the sensitivity of the information in it. But it will resemble a triple net agreement where we'll be responsible for taxes, insurance, and things like that. Road maintenance.
Can you explain what triple net
Sure.
means?
There'll be a base rate for the building, and then all operating costs with the facility will be paid for by the state, but the property owner will manage that. So we don't have to hire cleaners. We don't have to hire if there's a shingle that fell off the roof, they'll take care of that. We'll take care of the utilities, but snow removal, lawn care, they'll hire for that and take care of any sort of maintenance that we need. So we don't have the resources to hire out for that. So it'll be a lot easier.
But we pay for that.
Correct.
I want that to be clear. We pay for that. So that will come out of DCF's operating budget for that. So maintenance, utilities, insurance.
Any sort of damages, anything that we do to the building, as part of fit up, we'll have to take care of that as well.
So we're paying a lease payment to lease the building, but also any maintenance or utilities that is used, we pay for that as well.
All operating expenses.
And leases are negotiated through BGS when it's dealing with buildings, not through DCF. So I know that Senator Sears has a question, and maybe Mark will have you back in to talk about the documents, construction documents, and BGS's role in that. Let's have Commissioner Brown come back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I should have prefaced my remarks to the Deputy Commissioner earlier regarding raise the age, recognizing that she wasn't on board, nor were you, Commissioner, when the decisions were made, and there was a prior commissioner and deputies, DCF, who worked with us on the raise the age legislation. So you've kind of been handed this. But during your remarks, you mentioned you hope that the stays at Beckett would be as short as possible. And it raised for me our earlier discussion with the deputy commissioner about a small number of dangerous kids who both at age 18 and I'm sure when we get to raise the age to 19, if we do, as well as under 18 kids who are, that small number are dangerous. Is there a plan to deal with that age group? If in fact the Beckett program is as short as possible. So I'm envisioning, maybe it's 5 kids statewide, maybe it's 10. What is the plan long-term for those kids?
Just so I'm clear, Senator, which age group are you referring to when you say
Either
those?
one, either those under 18 who, what we were taught, I don't know if you heard the conversation, but It's centered around a small number of kids who are extremely dangerous, not necessarily based upon the crime they committed, but on the behaviors that they have exhibited. And will Beckett be dealing with that group who are under 18?
Yes, so for justice.
And so would they be there maybe long-term? That's what I'm trying to understand. You said as short as possible. And I'm wondering if kids could be there a year. Or if there's a plan for a different program that would handle that small group.
Sure. So this facility will serve justice-involved youth ages 12 to 17. So it would serve the group of kids that you're referring to that fall under that age group. And while our goal is to keep the stays as short as possible, we recognize that there may be youth that need to stay there longer. And so there won't be a time limit on how long a youth needs to stay there, particularly if they have a juvenile court proceeding that's needs to be resolved and they have not been adjudicated. Obviously we wouldn't want to move that youth out of state until they've been adjudicated and we're able to, and they're ready to step down to a lower level of treatment. But this facility will serve those youth, Senator. In terms of older emerging adults that are 18 years old that are in the raise the age population right now, they would not be served in this. And I think, as you heard from the Deputy Commissioner, those are some of those services that we're looking at, that we're trying to evaluate of how do we serve certain populations and raise the age. We, through the BAA and the legislature support, we were allocated funding to create some programming, and we're working on that right now, rolling that out. And conversations continue internally, and hopefully we'll be in a different position to have conversations with you soon, Senator, and the legislature on our thinking on other services as well. But that's the work we're doing right now, because we want to make sure we're meeting the needs across the spectrum of youth and emerging adults that we're working with.
Thank you. This is more of a comment, Madam Chair. And when I was listening to the gentleman from Mr. O'Grady from Buildings and General Services, back when we made the decision to close Woodside, it was our understanding it was going to be cheaper to operate something like the Beckett program, and that we would be able to collect Medicaid funding. That was a prior Secretary of Human Services, by the way. But at any rate, I'm wondering if we're getting to a point where what it costs for both buildings and operations isn't close to where we were with Woodside.
Well, we're still negotiating those terms, Senator. And I don't want to commit to a number, but we still believe this will be significantly more cost-effective model than Woodside was. And hopefully we'll have, as we finalize the lease and the operating agreements and the budget for that operating agreement, that we'll have more details to share in the coming months as those details are finalized. But based on our work on this initially and our ongoing work, I've not seen anything that's popped up that changes our initial assessment that this would be a much more cost-effective model to serve these youth.
Certainly hope so. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just a quick addendum to that. Financial considerations are important, but I was also having toured Woodside. I was horrified by the therapeutic setting for the kids. My assumption is that this will be a much more effective building situation in that regard. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, then that's one of the things that really draws us to this project and this facility specifically, is a former inn, so it has a really warm feel to it, and we feel like this will be a very therapeutic milieu for the youth to be in, versus, as you indicated, Woodside was built in the 80s and was more like a correctional institute than a treatment center.
Right. I just remember walking through building passageways and into rooms where these people were spending their days, and there were no windows anywhere. So you had the feeling you were underground this looks like a much more modern setting. So thank you for that.
So right now, in terms of justice involved juveniles, where are they being housed when they need to be housed? Because Woodside is closed. In fact, the bulldozers are there tearing it down to build another facility for another population. Beckett is not up and running. So where are, and I know COVID has impacted this, but where are they currently being housed?
So we have been working with some in-state providers to reconfigure their program to serve a higher level need of youth in not a physically secure building like Woodside, but in a staff secure setting with increased staffing. And so that model is in place, and we are serving youth there. And then we also have other crisis beds like Turtle Rock that were stood up recently, and you know, they hadn't been budgeted, but in the BAA those were budgeted this year as well, and so those are playing a role as well. Also, we have a contract with New Hampshire for the Sununu Center, and while we've used it sparingly, we have used it. We've sent one Vermont youth there, and then we've had some other youth from other states that came into Vermont that we needed. Under the ICJ, we need to hold them in a secure facility, and so they were placed there for periods of time while we worked with their home state to return them. But so far, we've had one Vermont youth go to that facility. 6 out-of-state youth transition from there back to their home state.
We have a question here. Cheryl, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner, how many justice-involved youth are we talking about at this time that would be eligible for Beckett?
You're going into my afternoon presentation, but
Okay, well, maybe we can wait.
Maybe we can hold off on that.
We
till
can
this
hold off
afternoon.
on that. Thank you.
Great. So the Beckett proposal for the building in Newbury is a building secure, not staff secure.
it will be a building secure facility. Yes.
Which means there's a fence
Yes.
around the building.
So there'll be a fence around the areas where they can go out the building. Yes.
Recreational.
The recreational one will go around the front of the building as well. There'll be a little spot for them to go outside.
And Beckett is the one that's working through the permitting issues right now with the Development Review Board in Newbury, as well as the Act 250.
So they were initially the moving applicant, and then in terms of our work with the Act 250 Commission, they had some questions, there was some communications, and because the state of Vermont will be contracting for Beckett to run a program there, we'll be leasing the property. They determined we needed to be the Department of Children and Families need to be a co-applicant. So now we are a co-applicant on the Act 250 application, and I believe also with the DRP now.
So you're really getting into a deep arena that you don't normally work in.
Fortunately, we have a very close working relationship with our partner at BGS.
I rest my case.
Yeah.
Questions, anything further? Okay, let's transition to BGS in terms of where you folks are. I'd like to know a little bit more in terms of what your role is in looking at the construction documents and when we get ready to go out to bid, what that process is, because it's state dollars that's paying for the renovations. It's DCF that's working with Beckett, and Beckett's the one that's would be negotiating with architects and contractors, but they're spending our money. So we need to have some oversight in the department that does that on a normal basis is BGS. So that'd be.
Madam Chair, I'm going to defer to Joe Aegis, Rena Karish. They were handling the build out.
Okay, why don't you both want to come up? I think one of the goals to have PGS involved because we're spending so much state money that we really, and it's coming through the Department of Children and Family Services that are not used to working in the construction world. So, Joe, welcome. If you both could just identify yourself.
Good morning,
Right.
Joe Ager, Director of Design and Construction for Buildings and General Services.
Sabrina Parrish, Project Manager for Buildings and General Services.
So our role in this is really to provide some oversight for the design and construction. They're not using our contract, but we did suggest certain things that we would typically do, such as bonding, the insurance, stuff like that. So as their architect is working through the process of developing the schematic design, design development, et cetera, when that phase is complete, or even partially during that phase, we have gone on site and are also reviewing drawings and providing feedback, just as if it was one of our projects. And they're incorporating those changes, or we're having discussions with them about the reasoning behind why we've suggested this or want this changed or something like that. So as part of that, as Commissioner Brown had mentioned, they have brought on a construction manager. So what they're doing with the construction manager early on is that construction manager is able to also work with the architect to provide insight from their point of view, with selection of materials, even right now, the potential of the labor market and materials because of COVID and things like that. So also providing that aspect. We're somewhat at the table. We're not lead, but we're there and we're able to review and provide feedback, good and bad.
You don't have the ultimate say. The ultimate say is with DCF in working with the project manager and the contractor and the architect.
That is correct. But I think it's, as Commissioner Brown said, he defers to us on the construction and design side of things like that. And certainly not there to steer them wrong, and things like that.
So there's 3.2 million. And part of the wetland remediation is going to be coming out of that 3.2 million. The construction world right now with materials, we know is a different world than it was last fall or even January when we were talking about money for renovations. Is there anything that's raising a red flag right now that the cost is going to be more?
Those are the red flags that are certainly out there. There are other things, and with working with the style of the building and not starting from scratch, you find the renovations and stuff like that. But that's the bonus of having a construction manager on board now, is to help out with those situations and go with a different product or different type of design to help out. It also is, for good or for bad, the issue of having to go through Act 250 and local zoning later in the fall. That was the time we're going to be going out to bid. That may actually help us because of everybody right now is racing to get projects that were delayed, completed, or school projects completed by the end of August, September. So when they actually go out to bid, we could probably be in a better position that some of those products are now more available and also the labor market is more available. But that's a guess on my part.
When do you anticipate what you know in your world at this point and what's happening in the DCF Beckett world? When do you anticipate going out to bid for the construction?
It would be December.
It'll be December.
We're anticipating with the permit process that there will be appeals. We've got the extra time.
Teresa?
Commissioner Brown described this as a building secure space. So in addition to the fencing that's sort of around the outside perimeter stuff, what other security measures are being scoped for the building itself?
So building secure basically means the doors are locked. So we do have a fence around the rec yard, but the entire building is not fenced. That security is provided by locked doors. This facility has 24/7 supervision. So there's always someone watching, there's cameras. So in addition to the locked doors, there's staff that are constantly watching those cameras to make sure the perimeter stays secure.
And what about windows and things like that? What kind, I mean, is it special glass or special plexiglass, or, you know, what kind of, because I've sort of seen seeing pictures that there's a lot of windows in this building, so, which is nice for natural light, but also provides opportunities.
So we use a corrections grade window, which is tamper and ligature resistant. So it does have special glass. The frame is special to basically eliminate or attempt to eliminate any tamper or ligature points in the windows.
What about the walls and doors? So that you can prevent a hole being punched through. And because if there was a hole punched through, we'd be responsible for repairing them. So I'm just thinking of the state hospital. When we built that, we had to go back in and do some things quite different. So I'm just wondering here in terms of internal in the building for sheetrock or wooden doors, how that would, are we working at that level?
I was going to defer to the architects on that. I think they can give a better description.
Yeah, hi, it's Doug Sonsalo with Studio Nexus Architects, and for the doors and windows and walls in the bedrooms themselves, they will be made out of concrete block. So we wouldn't have an issue with the punching. The doors would be hollow metal steel. So again, we would have no issue with the impacts. And then on the rest of the building, we're using impact resistant gypsum board, which has a high resistance to punching and impact as well. And those areas are generally staffed, as Turbina said. So the bedrooms are the highest level of impact resistance. And then the more public spaces have a little bit lower, but still do have impact resistance qualities to them as well.
So the inside environment for the building is a hard environment. It's not a soft.
Correct.
Not soft building inside.
No.
You're dealing with concrete walls.
Yeah, and mostly that's due to ligature. We can't have pieces that can get pulled off the wall or floor, or so everything has to be very well secured and to minimize that.
I just want people to be clear so that we don't have missed expectations. That's what it might really look like.
Yeah, so we are trying to normalize it as much as we can with the impact resistant gypsum board, and then using paint color to create that quote unquote softer environment. And as you mentioned, there are windows in every bedroom and in all the public spaces to the extent that we can put them in there, both to capitalize on natural light, which is in studies are helpful for these types of environments, and also for the views that the site has to have a therapeutic effect.
Which are terrific.
Yeah, the views are amazing.
Just so we're clear. Center Alliance, Jenny.
Thank you. And thank you for this. This is this sort of clarifies a lot of questions that we would have. But as you're going through this planning process and painting the colors that work, the psychology of colors is exciting. I hope you're getting into that one. But will there also be movable furniture and which would soften the environment in some way? And then how closely are you working with the planning folks at DCF? I see Judy Rex is here. So it would be interesting to hear some corresponding work or some collaborative work that you're doing that would help us understand how you're planning for the different types of kids who are going to be at that facility.
I can address the furniture question, and then maybe Judy can jump in on the other aspect with the ages and the differences in population. The furniture also needs to be anti-ligature, so no sharp edges, no points that can be tied off, ripped or pulled apart. So it's typically going to be a plastic type of material, and typically they're fairly heavy. And in the bedrooms themselves, they're typically fixed to the floor or wall. So again, there are some options out there that have like wood grain that help with the soft feeling, and there are also some color choices we can do. So we are looking at those, and we do have a furniture supplier that we've been working with to make the best decision to make this feel as residential as we can.
We also have an interior designer on staff, and we've been researching the issues of therapy and color, and making sure that we choose what's appropriate, as well as working with DCF and other consultants who are very much aware of these sorts of issues.
Questions? Anything further?
Well, thank you. That's helpful. I guess the second question was around the relationship between Judy Rex, who's doing planning within the department, and the architects, and consideration being given for the different levels of care needed for kids who are going to be in the facility.
Well, for the record, I'm Judy Rex.
Maybe we can transition so that BGS can move on and get away from the WIT table. Does that work?
And also, we could have Jennifer, the political director's been very involved in those conversations.
Okay, Jennifer, why don't you, if you're willing to come up, and Judy, we're getting ready.
I was actually going to defer to Jennifer Herbert to respond to Ginny's question. Okay, she's been working very closely with the Beckett clinicians. But I will say that Doug and Jim and I, we email each other almost on a daily basis. We're working very closely together.
Okay, great. So Jen, could you just identify yourself for the record, and then
I am Jennifer Herbert, DCF Clinical Director, and I have been very involved in this process. Creating as therapeutic an environment as we can is really important to our team. And we have a consultant from the CJJA, who the Council for Juvenile Justice Administrators, who has quite a bit of experience with reform throughout nationally in creating programs that are more therapeutic for this population. And the concept of creating an atmosphere within the building, given some of the necessities in terms of the flooring, the walls that we were just listening to. I think the psychology of color is very important. So if anyone who's been to Woodside, the colors were very cool, not great. So we're gonna choose much warmer colors, and anything where we can add texture to warm up the environment will be really important. And then there's always creative ways to have things that can be safely used by this population of youth. And so we'll be creatively looking into as many options as possible. And Dr. Lorraine Baker is also, we collaborate regularly. She's with Beckett, and she'll be overseeing the clinical programming, the behavioral health programming. And she's also very aware of our mission and is on board and helping with ideas in terms of how to create a home-like environment.
questions? Did that help, Jenny? A little bit?
Yes, it does. Thank you. That is actually very helpful.
Great. Thank you. It is intimidating sometimes to be in the witness chair. Anything else of the folks who just testified? And then if not, we'll go to Marshall Paul. Welcome.
Thank you.
Get back into the routine of testifying in person.
Indeed. So thank you. Good morning, Marshall Paul, Office of Defender General. I am the Chief Juvenile Defender and Deputy Defender General. And I think my comments are going to be brief. I just want to say that we're still very supportive of the direction that this project is going. I'm not actually surprised by some of the hiccups that have come up along the way. We're talking now about a spring 2022 instead of a fall 2021, sort of opening date, but that's not out of the ordinary, frankly, for a large construction project to start to run into those kinds of delays. I think that's something that we certainly anticipated. And frankly, we have been impressed at every step of the way with the work that DCF has done, the consultants they brought on, the work that they've done to make sure that this is a facility that we really kind of, frankly, I don't want to quite say cutting edge because I don't think I'm familiar enough with where things are, across the entire spectrum of sort of juvenile corrections facilities to say truly cutting edge, but certainly to address a lot of the biggest problems that we had with Woodside. And that's where I want to sort of draw the perspective back a little, is to look at this. I think there's been a fair bit of conversation identifying and frustration identifying that, for example, that this Beckett program won't serve certain needs that everybody recognizes DCF has. And I want to just sort of draw back the perspective because I know that it's we typically look at whatever the biggest, most in our face problem is and try to solve that first. And it's true that this project is not going to address 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and where does that population go? But what I think is extraordinarily important, and I'm really glad that DCF is doing, is working not only on sort of where is the hottest fire, where is the biggest problem, but working on the entire system of care. I think for a long time, we had been in this pattern where DCF would deal with whatever the most emergent problem within its system of care was, and there would be huge parts of that system of care that were just stagnant for years and years and years. They weren't improving, they weren't developing. Where outside, the best practices and the science around how best to work with kids who come into custody for these kinds of reasons, both, and here I'm talking both in the abuse and neglect and juvenile justice worlds. There was progress being made that wasn't being reflected here in Vermont. And so the way I see this is that, this is not a project that's going to solve this pressing problem of, where do 18-year-old kids go? Where do 19-year-old kids go? It's not a project that's going to solve some of the pressing problems around kids with serious psychiatric disorders and where they go. What it is a vast improvement to one piece of our system of care that was absolutely needed, absolutely necessary. And I'm really glad that rather than just sort of, patching and, making small incremental changes to try to keep, old facilities and old practices afloat, that what we're doing is moving on and saying, where do we need to be? Like, what is the best way to run one of these facilities now? And how do we position ourselves to make what we're building as close to that model as possible? And I'm really glad for that. I think that, as much as we talk about the importance of this very small group of, highly, potentially dangerous 18 and 19-year-olds, it's actually a really, really small part of the system. And a big part of our system, the bigger part of our system is these under 18 kids, ranging through from kids who really should be served in their homes, in the community, to kids at this Beckett end where we're talking, the very upper ends of the system of care for that population. So we're really, really happy with the work that DCF's been doing. We support it completely at this point. We're always skeptical and always watching, but we support, every move they made has been really positive. And we just see this as a really, just a huge step for Vermont's system of care for these kids. I mean, Woodside was a horrible facility. And, frankly, no juvenile facility that serves this population, you're not going to walk into it and mistake it for your home. There's just too much security that's necessary in order to run one of these places safely. But I do think that this will be, I've been to the facility before, back when it was Beckett's assessment facility. and it's beautiful. It's in a beautiful location. I swear nobody's mentioned the pond, but I swear I remember there was a pond on the property as you drove up. I mean, it is a gorgeous location. It is really just going to be a huge, I mean, just taking it from the perspective of the kids who will spend time there, this is just going to be, that I don't think there are any kids who spend time at Woodside who will spend time at this facility, just because I think there'll be enough time in between those two that they'll all have aged out. But I think that any kid who did spend time at Woodside would not see this facility as anything even like Woodside.
So that leads to a question, and Marshall, you may not be the one to answer this, and maybe Commissioner. We talked about Medicaid reimbursement. And is it the state or is it Beckett that's working with CMS to make sure that this program is Medicaid eligible? And that it's not driven by what the building looks like, it's driven by what the programming is, correct?
Correct. What is the treatment being delivered to this facility that impacts that conversation? It is still our goal to design a therapeutic program to serve these youth that's eligible to draw down Medicaid for that portion of the treatment that's Medicaid.
And who works with CMS for this? Is it the state or is it more Beckett for the Medicaid?
We would work with our partners at DEVA, and they would work with CMS and helping us put together, the request that this be a Medicaid eligible service, and then we would submit it to the colleagues at DEVA.
So then when we're talking about the contract for the programming, and that's separate than the contract for the operations of the building. It's the contract for the operations of the program. That's where you get into the Medicaid reimbursement for the cost of that. So make sure that that was on the table. Questions? Anything? Marcia?
Thank you.
Thank you. We're right on time. Can you believe it, for lunch? Right on time. So thank you, folks. DGS, DCF, we'll see you later on this afternoon. Let's break for lunch. We're due to come back at 12:45, and I think we're pretty much on schedule. Why don't we do that? Thank you.